Hello, and welcome to the movie universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Today, I'm going to be talking about something very special. I'm going to be talking about the legendary story, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know this story because like I said, it is the most legendary story in all the Sherlock Holmes novels out there, including the short stories. And rightfully so, because it took a very different approach to all of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's works. But before I can get into the whole fun origin of the story itself, we need to do an overview. The story goes like this. Sherlock Holmes is retained by a Dr. James Mortimer, who seeks his advice because his good friend Sir Charles Baskerville was found dead at his home Baskerville Hall. Apparently he died of a heart attack. However, there was strange footprints all around him. What were these footprints? They were of a giant hound. It's because of this that Dr. Mortimer tells Holmes and Watson the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles. What is the Hound of the Baskervilles? Well, it's basically a family curse that was put forth on them back in the 1600s during the English Civil War. What happened was Sir Charles's ancestor, Sir Hugo Baskerville, had abducted a young maiden and locked her in his room. Of course, we know what he was planning to do with her later. And while she escapes, he chases after her with his hounds and with his army. He catches up with her, kills her, and in turn he's killed by a huge demonic hound. And ever since then, the hound has been haunting the Baskerville family, and allegedly has been causing their deaths ever since. But it isn't just Sir Charles's death that brings him to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. It's the fact that his nephew, Sir Henry, is coming to inherit. He is the last of the Baskerville line, and Dr. Mortimer fears for his life. Sherlock Holmes, of course, is immediately intrigued by all this, so he offers him his services, and he and Watson plan to meet with Dr. Mortimer and Sir Henry when he arrives in London. When Sir Henry arrives, they tell him about the legend. At the same time, Sir Henry tells Holmes of a letter he received when he first got to London, warning him that if he values his life, to stay away from the moor. And shortly after, Holmes and Watson realize that Sir Henry is being followed, and unfortunately they lose him. Holmes says he'll take the case, but unfortunately, there's a blackmail matter that he has to deal with first. So he sends Dr. Watson to accompany Sir Henry and to protect him at all times. And most importantly, to write to him about every single detail. Dr. Watson, being the loyal friend that he is, accompanies Sir Henry. They make it to Baskerville Hall. And after a short period of time, Dr. Watson meets Sir Henry's new neighbor, Jack Stapleton. He's an entomologist who has great knowledge of the countryside because, for you see, most of it is a great big moor. In fact, the county's name is actually Dartmoor. After a little walk through the area, Stapleton takes Watson to meet his sister, Beryl. But of course, Jack Stapleton goes off chasing a butterfly, and when Dr. Watson first sees Beryl Stapleton, she comes up to him and tells him to get out while he still can before something bad happens to him. She tells him this because she thinks he's Sir Henry. However, Dr. Watson immediately assures her that he is not Sir Henry. And before he could ask her why she tried to warn Sir Henry, she clammed up because her brother was coming. Of course, it doesn't take long for Sir Henry to meet Beryl Stapleton, and almost immediately he becomes enchanted by her beauty. However, shortly after that, strange things start happening. For starters, Dr. Watson and Sir Henry find that Sir Henry's butler is signaling somebody out there on the moor. They go to investigate and are attacked by somebody throwing rocks at them. And roughly at the same time, they hear a blood-curdling howl. After that little incident, Sir Henry and Dr. Watson confront the butler and his wife as to what was going on out there. And they confess that the man who attacked him out there was an escaped convict. And the only reason they were helping him was because he was actually the maid's brother. Meanwhile, Dr. Watson writes to Holmes every day as to what's been going on, and that's pretty much how most of the story goes until one day, Dr. Watson finally discovers a hidden cave where somebody's been living in, only to find out that that person living in there was Sherlock Holmes himself. When Watson learns of this, he is of course surprised that Holmes is there because he didn't expect him to be. To which Holmes explains that that's what he wanted him to think. In fact, that's what he wanted everyone to think, because if everyone knew that he was there, that would put the killer on his guard. So, of course, he had to make sure that nobody knew. It's at this moment we learn John Stapleton and Beryl Stapleton are not brother and sister. In fact, they're husband and wife. We also learn that John Stapleton has also been seeing another woman who was pretty close to Sir Charles, and she has no idea that he's actually married. And Sherlock Holmes makes it clear that this is going to be their advantage, because he knows that Stapleton is behind this. And shortly thereafter, Holmes and Watson hear the howling of a hound and the screaming of a man. They go to the body and they see the clothes of Sir Henry, and so they think the worst. But on further inspection, it turns out it was the escaped convict wearing Sir Henry's clothes. So why did the Hound kill him? Isn't it obvious? The Hound thought it was Sir Henry. Shortly afterwards, they meet up with Sir Henry at Baskerville Hall, and Holmes tells Sir Henry that the case is done. He's got nothing to fear now, so they're going to go to London. But the fact is, no, they're not. Because before they met up with Sir Henry, Holmes had learned that Stapleton is actually a cousin of Henry Baskerville, and that's what this is all about. He plans to kill Sir Henry so he could get the family fortune. But of course they need further proof, so instead he decides to set a trap for Stapleton, using Sir Henry as bait. Holmes' plan goes just like this. He tells Sir Henry to accept an invitation to Stapleton's house, where he will walk back alone in the dark. Meanwhile, Holmes and Watson pretend to leave for London, but in fact, they're still there, and they even enlist the help of Inspector Lestrade. Sir Henry does as he's instructed, and he is attacked by the Hound, but Holmes and Watson manage to kill it. Stapleton realizes that he's failed, and he flees. Holmes and Dr. Watson, believing that Stapleton might have gone back to his home, head back there to arrest him. Instead, they find Miss Stapleton locked up in the attic, badly beaten. She confesses that she was part of the plan, but she didn't realize how evil of a man he really was. And truth be told, she actually tried to help Sir Henry. In fact, she was the one who sent the letter trying to warn him to stay away. And that's why when she saw Dr. Watson, she was telling him to stay away if he valued his life, because she didn't want her husband to kill him. They didn't find Stapleton at the house, so it stood to reason he probably escaped onto the moor. The next day, they follow his trail, and they find that he met a grisly end because he went into the moor and drowned. And of course, Holmes and Watson return to London, and pretty much that's it. Now, The Hound of the Baskervilles is actually the third Sherlock Holmes novel that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle written. And believe it or not, this story was made 8 years after he killed off Sherlock Holmes in his book, The Final Problem. However, Conan Doyle got inspired to write another Sherlock Holmes novel, and this one paved the way for his eventual comeback. Now, when he wrote this story, he wrote it as more like a in-between. We're talking like before The Final Problem and maybe after The Red-Headed League. It's not very clear, but either way, it's put down that this was before his death. So why is this story so legendary? Well, there's quite a few reasons, actually. First and foremost, the fact that he technically brought his legendary character back to life after 8 years. And second, it's because the story took a very different approach. And that would be the supernatural approach. Because every one of the Sherlock Holmes books, except for this one, it's all about science. There's nothing supernatural going on at all. Now, I know some of you are probably wondering, what was the inspiration for this story? Well, like any other great author, Conan Doyle took inspiration from many things all around him. The first and most obvious one, the Hound itself. He got that from the legendary story of the Black Shook. It's basically an old legend of a black hound that haunts graveyards and sometimes hunts people down. It depends which version of the story you're hearing. Because like any ghostly legend, there's many different versions out there. And while researching the legends of the Black Shook, Conan Doyle came across a story about an evil man named Sir Richard Cabell. There's a lot of variations to his legend, but it's been said he was a wicked, wicked man who made a pact with the devil. He died in 1677, and believe me, the townspeople were very grateful that he did, too. In fact, they were so grateful that when they built his mausoleum, they actually put iron bars on it to make sure that he never could escape. True story. So how does this fit in? Well, it's been said that he was an avid hunter who loved to just hunt with packs of dogs. And one story goes that on the night of his burial, ghostly dogs were seen running across a moor towards his grave. In fact, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did research on the man, he actually talked to a living descendant. And when he talked to him, he told him a very different story to the legend of his family and the hounds. And the story goes like this. He was a wicked man indeed, but he also abused his wife. Eventually, she had enough and tried to flee. He caught up with her, and he killed her. He also killed her beloved pet dog after he murdered her. and it's been said by the family that he was haunted by the ghost of the dog for the rest of his life. Now, I'm sure you can see and understand why Sir Arthur Conan Doyle put that element into the story. And even more surprising, the county of Dartmoor is actually a real place. In fact, Sir Richard Cabell lived on the eastern part of it. And I'll tell you this, if you actually see Dartmoor, you can understand why he chose that location, because it really just screams out that something sinister is within the wind, you know? In fact, there's actually a video on YouTube talking about that. I'll put the link below so you can find it, and I suggest you watch it. It's very fascinating. Just think, in this whole county, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle got both a storyline to go with, a plot, and a location as well. So where did he get the name Baskerville from? Well, believe it or not, his coachman who drove him there was actually named Harry Baskerville. The name grabbed Sir Arthur Conan Doyle immediately that he just had to use it. It was the perfect name, the Hound of the Baskervilles. And a legendary story was conceived. So now you know the story as well as the origin. When you put all these elements together, you got quite a story that has withstood the test of time and has definitely had a huge standing in pop culture. So much so that there have been countless movies as well as TV adaptations. And that I will talk about next Friday. So tune in, because we're going to talk about the movies of the Hound of the Baskervilles. This is Movie Fan, signing off.